My name is Rob Johnson. I'm the chair of the Transportation Policy Board. Welcome to our April 12th, 2018 meeting. Let's go around the table and do some self-introductions. Start with our Madam Vice Chair.
Becky Erickson, Mayor of the City of Paulsbo, representing Kitsap Transit.
Doug Richardson, Pierce County Council Chair.
Ron Lucas, Mayor of the Town of Steilacoom, other cities and towns in Pierce County.
Terry Ryan, Snohomish County Council, representing Community Transit.
Dan, is your card is in your nameplate, and make sure that
Dan McKisson, ILWU.
That's Dan McKisson from the ILWU.
Jesse Hammersmith, Regional Staff Committee, alternate.
Janice Zahn, City of Bellevue, council member representing Metropolitan Center.
It's Kate Kreller. I'm from the City of Tequila, representing Sound Cities Association, which is 37 other cities.
Vince Wong, Mercer Island City Council, representing Sound City Association.
Dana Ralph, Mayor of Kent, representing other cities and towns in King County.
Kelly McGurty, PSRC staff.
Don Caron, City of Redmond, representing RPEC.
Doug DeForest, representing the Thurston Regional Planning Council.
Dave Ramsey, Transportation Improvement Board.
Jeff Ketchel, Snohomish Health District, representing Health.
Rob Berman from HDR Engineering, representing the Seattle Chamber.
Trinity Parker with Sound Transit, representing Transportation Operators Committee. Carla Chavez with Transportation Choices Coalition.
Roger Millar, Washington State DOT.
Rob Gelder, Kitsap County.
Beck Ashby, Port Orchard City Council, representing other cities, Kitsap.
Good morning, Kevin Gorman, Council Member, City of Bremerton.
We've got a couple of folks on the line. Councilmember John Clausen, are you there?
Yes, I am. John Clausen is the alternate to Kitsap Transit.
Good morning. Councilmember Stephanie Wright from Snohomish County, are you on the line? How about Councilmember Deb Nelson?
Yes, I am. Good morning.
Good morning. Councilmember Paul Roberts, are you there?
I am. Thank you.
Good morning. Janet Ray from AAA, are you there?
I'm here. Good morning.
Good morning. Anybody else on the phone that we've missed? And welcome Tacoma Councilmember Ryan Mello. Thank you for being here this morning. So I have a very brief report of the chair today. I want to first welcome Councilmember Zahn. Thank you for being with us this morning. We're grateful to have you here as the alternate for Bellevue. It's sort of the tradition of this body for new members, if they want to make a little welcoming, open introductory remarks. You're certainly by no means obligated to do so, but if you want to speechify, now would be your time.
Well, thank you. I'm excited to serve as the alternate for the Metropolitan Center of Bellevue. Just to give you a little context, I've lived in the Puget Sound area most of my life. I'm an immigrant from Hong Kong. I served on the Transportation Commission for the City of Bellevue for 4 years, the last year as chair. I also work for the Port of Seattle, have for the last 14 years, overseeing the construction management functions. So I'm excited to be here and be part of transportation.
Thank you for joining us this morning. We have one other piece of news for the good of the order today, and that is the impending retirement of our own Cheryl Salties. So I want to say this is Cheryl's last full Transportation Policy Board meeting, and we're going to be passing around a little card just in case you want to leave a little memory or memento or thought for Cheryl as she moves along to the next chapter of her life. That card just briefly says the TPB and members of PSRC want to thank you, Cheryl, for your 26 years of service to the board and to the regional council. And we're grateful to you because you demonstrate such a high level of integrity and professionalism, but do it with such a welcoming spirit. And just your generosity is very well known. We're grateful to you for your hard work, and we wish you very well in your next endeavors, whatever they may be. And I know you're not one for long speeches, as most everybody else around the table is, but if you'd like the chance, we'd love to hear some words of wisdom for you as you leave us at the end of the month.
Well, thank you. I might surprise you today.
You know, I was thinking last night that I have been at this table long enough to see the future become the present. So I'm going to take you on a little time travel back to February of 1992. The Puget Sound Council of Governments had just been dissolved, and the Puget Sound Regional Council had been formed in its place to continue as the federally designated metropolitan planning organization for the region, but also as a new regional transportation planning organization authorized by the State Growth Management Act, and with that came some additional new responsibilities. The landmark Federal Intermodal Surface Transportation Efficiency Act, affectionately known as ICE-T, had just been signed into a law, and that brought sweeping changes to transportation planning and policy, all of which had to be sorted through and addressed. And then closer to home, the State House of Representatives was poised to act on a bill that would establish a new regional transit authority for King, Pierce, and Snohomish counties. Oh, I'm getting nervous, sorry. Take a breath.
You're doing good. Keep going.
And then closer to home, well, as if that weren't enough, the Puget Sound Air Transportation Committee that had been tasked to look at future air service needs and solutions had just completed its draft recommendation, which included a third runway at SeaTac Airport. So that's when I arrived, and I was fresh from 20 years at an insurance company. At that point, my public sector experience was riding the elevator with the EPA employees that worked in my building. I started work on Monday at PSRC, and my inaugural assignment, which was due on Thursday, was to assemble and mail out the agenda for the very first meeting of the newly formed Transportation Policy Board. So look how far the region has come. And it was an exciting time back then in the 90s, and it's just as exciting now. And I find that each time this board meets, your work helps shape the future. And it's not easy for me to give up my ringside seat to that. So it's not easy to say goodbye. It's been a privilege and my pleasure to have served this board over the past 26 years. And I want to thank you for your friendship and your kindness, and for the opportunity to see firsthand what you've accomplished at this table. So thank you. Thank you all.
Any roasting, I'm sure, of Cheryl will be done off campus at some point, but anything that either of you fellow coworkers of Cheryl's would like to add?
Well, I'll let Josh say all the nice things, which are totally true, but I'm not happy with this, so I'm going on record, and if the ink isn't dry yet, I still have a few days to convince Cheryl to stay.
Cheryl, I just, on behalf of the entire region, just say thanks. You know, you gave a great overview of your career here and all the important areas of progress that we've made together as a region, and the hard work that we've done together. And you've been, as you said, you know, at the front lines, a part of that from day one. And you know, it's not lost on me. You know, we're, I think, very blessed at this agency to have just incredible staff that are here dedicated to you and the board. Cheryl, you're one of the folks that have really helped to instill that public service ethic here at PSRC from day one, and it's something that you know, we sometimes take for granted, but you're one of the big reasons why we have that through your daily service and your commitment to this organization, the work that we do. So I just can't thank you enough. We've known each other over a decade, and both as a board member and as the executive director here, and I know many of you give Cheryl a call. You're wondering what's going on at the board meeting. You need resources. She's always there for you, and you've always been here for all of us. And no pressure for the board, but Cheryl and I did have a conversation a little earlier that she can't officially retire until the policy board approves the region's transportation plan. So I know that's on the agenda today, so just no pressure on the board members, but this has been a great start to the meeting. Don't ruin it, right? Thanks, Cheryl.
And we look forward to your application to join the Transportation Policy Board as a member of the community or environment or business. You're going to be replaced ably by Casey Moreau. Casey, welcome to your first official meeting. Anything that you'd like to say to kick us off? Okay, great. Okay, folks, thank you, Cheryl. I know it's going to be a long goodbye over the next couple weeks, but this is our last official TPB meeting, so we wanted to take a couple of minutes to recognize you for your service, and we're grateful. So let's move on into communications and public comment. I think we only have one individual signed up to give public comment today, and that's Mr. Paul W. Locke. Mr. Locke, the microphone is coming to you. Hang on for just 1 second.
I'm Paul W. Locke. I see nothing to make the rail system automate. Automated elevator system. We cannot afford having employees operate the system. The rail system. Our taxes are going off the board. It goes for a few $100s in my case, to hundreds of dollars a month. And I'm sure there's a lot of others the same in boat. You can't afford to live in Seattle at the rate we're going. We're running up debts. I think you're going in the wrong direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Locke. That is all the individuals who've signed up to speak today, so we'll now move on to the...
Mr. Chair, if I may, for just a second.
Sure.
For those on the board who have not taken a chance to speak to Mr. Locke, either before or after a meeting, I want to bring to your attention that he is a distinguished military veteran, if you didn't know that, and gave great amount of time to military service and to the country. So faithful as he is coming to our meetings, that is part of the story, and I just wanted to bring that to your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor Lucas. Item number 4 on the agenda, Kelly, for our staff report.
Yes, I just have a couple of quick updates. I wanted to let you know that at the March Executive Board meeting, the new centers framework was adopted. It was an incredibly robust conversation. It took the bulk of the meeting. It was a split vote, but the new centers framework has passed, and so we're now moving forward with vision and working on implementation and dealing with all of the issues that have been addressed, and we will figure those out through the Vision 2050 process, and then again as we move forward with future project selection cycles. Speaking of which, again, we've talked at length about our project selection process, but just a reminder that it is now underway. We are currently reviewing what will probably end up being about 200 or over 200 projects for eligibility that will come through the system. As a quick reminder for those of you who might be new to the board, we will have 2 regional competitions, one for our Federal Highway Administration funds, one for our Federal Transit Administration funds. Each of the 4 countywide forums will have a competition, and then we also have a large amount of FTA funds that we will distribute via our earn share process. So all of that is underway, and you will see all of those project recommendations in July. And then lastly, I wanted to note that the public comment period for the Vision 2050 scoping process was wrapped up in March, and there's also an online survey that was conducted. It is still actually on the website, and we will have Paul Ingram come to your next meeting and give a report on that. And that is my report, Chair.
So I'm sure that everybody's busy working away in your sub-area groups to talk about that July meeting. So more to come on that, but so far so good in the work that has led up to the Project Selection Task Force, and excited to see that one across the finish line. Any questions from the board for Kelly? Okay. Let's move on to agenda item number 5. There are 2 items on our consent agenda today. The adoption of the minutes from our March 8th meeting and a recommendation authorizing a change in T2040 status for a WSDOT project from Seneca to Mercer. Any individual would like to pull any items from the consent agenda? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Moved and seconded by Councilmember Ryan and Mayor Erickson. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. The consent agenda is adopted. Let's move on to agenda item number 6. This is the meat of our discussion today, and it is the Regional Transportation Plan and the hopeful final review before this goes to the Executive Board and to the General Assembly in May. So, Kelly, I know you've got some slides you want to walk us through, and then we'll open it up for discussion, questions, and dialogue.
Yes, thank you. So I'm going to start with a few reminders. It's been a somewhat lengthy process, but we're finally at the end of this bar. And just a couple of reminders before we revisit the information that we provided last month. So as you all know, we've been working on this since 2017. We have presented to you what's in the plan, and I'll just do a quick flyover of that. We have provided the performance outputs of the plan at various points to the board. Last month, we were in front of you with more detailed information on the public comments that we received and the proposed staff responses. And as we went through that summary last month, we did promise, because that was such a lot of information, that you would have one more bite at that apple. And so we're going to walk through that again today and get your additional feedback and hopefully recommendation on the draft plan to the Executive Board. So a very high flyover reminder of what's in the plan. Early on when you adopted the work program for the plan, first and foremost, we really wanted to recognize the incredible investment that's happened since 2010. So really showcasing the investments in the plan. The small map on the right, you can show a lot of projects have been completed in our current plan. There's also been extraordinary funding investments through Connecting Washington, Sound Transit 3, the fast ferries, and numerous others. So really highlighting those that remarkable progress. Also recognizing that there are still near-term gaps in performance and funding deficiencies, particularly for cities and counties and local transit. Getting ahead on key issues, we've talked about this at length throughout the last couple of years: technology, climate change, the ongoing need to bring our maintenance and preservation operations up to today's needs, meeting federal requirements, kind of the nuts and bolts of what we do here, as well as some administrative tasks such as our SEPA addendum and updating the project list, which is a very visible aspect of the plan. In terms of progress, we feel good of what the plan has been able to accomplish. You know that we felt that Transportation 2040 was still a solid basis for the plan. So the Regional Transportation Plan for 2018 was built from that. We do think, based on the performance output, that the plan does support the regional growth strategy, provides a lot of choices. As you know, the Regional Integrated Transit Network for the first time. We provided a lot of data related to how the plan is improving access, both to transit, but to jobs, to opportunities, to other destinations, improving the reliability of the system, the safety, addressing our environmental issues, and of course, updating our financial strategy to deliver all of those investments. So that was a very, 2 slides worth for a massive amount of information in the draft plan. But as I mentioned, I'm going to give a more summarized version of what I provided to you last month. Just reminding you what was in the public comments, and then a few comments that we particularly wanted your attention, and we walked through those last month, but we wanted to give you that additional opportunity this month to provide further feedback. So a couple of quick reminders. We did receive the highest number, as far as we know, of respondents to the plan, 152 respondents, 842 individual comments that we parsed out. The majority of these we coded as really just general comments, either talking about, specific investments or specific issues. About 100 comments were technical corrections. We are still in process of doing these. These were not policy changes. These were things, either we received some really good suggestions about you could provide some clarifying language to this particular issue, so we're working to do that. A lot of, can you fix this project title? Can you fix this project on the map? And so we are actively working on that. We tackled the executive summary and the main plan document first, and we were able to finish that yesterday. But the many technical corrections to the appendices, we are still in process. The board review, there were about 20 comments that we thought, let's bring these to your attention, which we did last month, and I'll walk through those in greater detail. Again, none of these were necessarily amending or requesting to amend the plan, but they really were more relevant to future PSRC work program items that we will continue to work with you on as we move forward. In general, I will say we've noted this before. Overall, there's support for the plan. I think if I were to sum up in one very simplistic sentence, it's do more and do it faster. I think that is the message that we are getting from our constituents. So what I'd like to do, and I'll try to do this as quickly as I can to get that feedback that we're hoping from. First, I'm going to just kind of give you a highlight of the categories that we received the most comments on and what that flavor was. And then I'll once again walk through those comments that we thought we should elevate for your feedback, our proposed response to that, and I'll remind the board the feedback we heard last month, and then we'll move forward. So the number one comments that we received on the plan were related to the financial strategy, and we thought it was really interesting that it was really equal in number, the comments that did not support tolls or road usage charges to those that did support some kind of user fee system. So that was an interesting output. The majority of the comments were actually on suggestions or concerns about implementation of user fees and a road usage charge. That is something that we're definitely beefing up in adding more clarifying language in the plan to note that, we are not mandating that this happen, and we are outlining the steps that will continue to need to happen over time before something like that comes to the region. In addition, there were comments on other aspects of the strategy, and I think the key one we noted there was the needs of local jurisdictions. The second highest category of comments were on bicycle pedestrian investments in the plan. We also received some comments were in opposition, some comments were in support. There was a higher margin of comments that were supportive of bicycle pedestrian investments, and comments on both safety of those investments and also supporting specific projects or requesting specific projects. Speaking of which, that was also the next category of comments, supporting existing projects that are in the plan or requesting new or additional investments in specific areas. And when we receive comments like that, we generally either we look to see if there's already something on the books, or we just remind folks that we don't recommend and put forward the projects, our jurisdictions do. Equity was another field of comments that we received. In general, folks are supportive of the equity lens approach that we're using in our evaluation, both of the transportation plan, but more broadly as well. Suggestions to integrate equity more fully, continue to do that, and also interesting to note that comments that when we do consider equity, don't just consider equity of population groups, but also geographies around the region. And again, any implementation in the future of a user fee system, make sure that equity is addressed. We received a number of comments related to freight, really falling under the category of supporting and recognizing the importance of our freight networks. And we also received, and I think this is true of the vision scoping comments as well, they received a lot of comments about transportation. We received a lot of comments about growth management, and a lot of this we are noting that we are going to be addressing this in Vision 2050. So moving into the 21 comments that as staff we reviewed and thought, let's bring this to the board's attention. And again, they weren't framed as please amend the plan to do this. It was really topics that we knew that you all cared about and we've talked about, or items related to our future work program that we wanted to bring to your attention. So these are the 10 categories of those, and I'm going to quickly summarize them again. And again, this is the conversation that we held last month. So the first one was a call to note the emerging role of fast ferries and waterborne transportation, calling for us to do further planning. We totally recognize that this is an emerging area of study. We agree with that, so we are going to strengthen that language in the final plan. And then this is the type of activity that we'll continue to have the conversation with the board as we move forward on implementation of the plan, and our future work program items is what does this look like, and what is the direction of the region for us to move ahead on this. A lot of comments related to technology, of course. That's a hot topic. Comments supporting our continued technology work, and really a lot of interest in participating on those stakeholder committees. So again, this wasn't necessarily a new request, but we wanted to bring it to your attention because we've been talking about technology quite a bit. So our proposed response is simply there is a recommendation to establish an advisory committee and to move forward on policy and modeling research. And if I may, I apologize. I failed to mention that at the last meeting I did promise to remind folks of the recommendations that are actually in the plan and the handout at your, the two-sided handout at your table. These are the key recommendations for future work that are included in the plan, and I will refer to, excuse me, some of those. The feedback we got from the board last month on number one, it was, yes, support. On number two, some really good feedback from you all to make sure, and this is something that we are definitely aware of, we don't need to duplicate efforts. We need to collaborate but not replicate what we're doing. And also, two sides of the coin, consider all the different types of technology, but at the same time, we can't tackle everything, so be mindful of the scope. So as we move forward with this work, those are some of the questions that we'll definitely be tackling. On climate change, the comment that we brought to your attention was a request to create a regional forum. And our response here is we've been working very closely with the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency and other of our partner agencies, EPA and Ecology, for example. We have our 4-part greenhouse gas strategy. We've been working with the Clean Air Agency on the work that they're doing. And we've promised to report back at regular intervals. The comment, the feedback from the board last month when we talked about this was to elevate the elements of our 4-part strategy that include land use in particular and active transportation. So we will continue to do that, and as vision proceeds, we will continue to work on climate change there as well. Freight. We just, again, there were a handful of commenters, but they had a lot of comments related to freight, and we thought it was important to just bring to your attention that that we should be noting the key freight issues and explore some of these emerging trends. And again, we agree with that. This is an area of personal interest. I've spoken to a number of folks, and we are looking to kind of re-energize and re-engage with our freight committees, the Regional Freight Mobility Roundtable, as well as the Staff Freight Committee. And we want to be mindful of not having meetings for meeting's sakes, but what are the key issues? And as we move forward with vision and implementation of the transportation plan, where can PSRC be helpful on the topic of freight? Special needs transportation. We received a comment to, and I always bungle this just a little bit because this is not my language, addressing common digital standards and exchange protocols among transportation providers. I think my plain English translation of this is the sharing of information and making that somewhat standardized. And so we do have an active special needs transportation committee, and our proposal is we put that in front of them, and as they update the next Coordinated Transit Human Services Plan, that they address some of that information. In terms of roadway capacity, we got a call to work with WSDOT to ensure that all of the systems are integrated, and our proposed response there is we think that we agree and we think that that's actively happening, particularly through the State Facilities Action Plan that's included in our Regional Transportation Plan. And we will continue to be coming back to you if not next month, shortly thereafter, with next steps on the various aspects of the State Facilities Action Plan. And the I-5 Corridor Partnership has already had its first meeting, and the next meeting, I believe, is next week. So things are definitely moving forward. The comments related to bicycle pedestrian investments, this was a request to adopt Vision Zero and a complete streets policy. Our response to this is we think that there's a body of work that needs to happen before we can take an adoption, and so our proposed response is let's begin work on that with our Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee. And on the complete streets, that would be a great topic for our growth staff to continue to work through the Vision 2050 process that's currently underway and reviewing our multi-county planning policies. The feedback that we received from the board was to potentially do a survey of all of our jurisdictions as to who has complete streets policies, which we think is a great idea, and that's something we can definitely do. And if I may, I'll go back once because the board feedback regarding number 6 was a comment to consider in the future how we address housing growth and investment. So I think that'll be an interesting topic as we go through the Vision 2050 process and then begin the next Regional Transportation Plan process. We'll try to remember to deal with all of those larger issues at that time. On multimodal, we had received a request to identify a target mode split. Again, this is something that would be a fairly lengthy discussion at the board, which has not happened yet. So our proposed response is if the board would like to have that conversation, we are certainly open to that. We can't adopt it for this plan because that would take some time, but if that is the direction of the board, we can certainly continue to work towards that as we move to build the next plan. Analysis and documentation, we received a comment to be more explicit in the plan regarding the challenges, so don't be quite so rosy about the plan, and we agree, and so we're working to provide more clarity in the final document. Lastly, equity. Again, I mentioned that was one of the themes that folks were supportive of the equity lens approach and addressing equity. We received a comment specifically, again, related to setting some kind of performance targets for minority, low income, and marginalized groups. And again, this is something that that's a body of work that would need to happen before we could set that target. So we wanted to bring that to your attention, and should you choose to tackle that moving forward and into the next plan, we could certainly do that. The board discussion from last month on the equity conversation, and I think I touched on this earlier, was to a couple of things. One is to make sure that geographic equity is included in the equity lens, looking at the big picture region-wide, and including all users, but perhaps most importantly, define the term. And that's something that throughout the course of this process, we've definitely noted is something to work on. And as part of the Vision 2050 update process, having the board discussion about defining equity is something that's going to be tackled. So that was the very abbreviated summary from the information we provided to you at the last meeting. The board was asked at the last meeting to kind of absorb all of that. We have everything posted online. We have, this is my sympathy prop. This is the spreadsheet of all of the comments and the proposed staff responses. They are online. All of the comments are online. The categorization is online. So the board was asked to think about that, and if you had further feedback or further requests for revisions, to send them to us by the end of March. At this point, we have not received any further amendments or edits, but we want to, based on today's discussion, see if there are any concerns with the approach that we've moved forward, particularly with addressing those comments that we felt needed to be elevated. And if there's any other feedback, and if there is additional revisions to be made, we can certainly do that. The original schedule was calling for us to have all of these technical corrections finalized in time, originally for the General Assembly, but we're doing our best to get that done in time for the Executive Board agenda mail out, which is next week. So I mentioned we're in the process of making those technical corrections through all of the appendices, and should you have additional revisions you'd like to discuss today, we will make those happen in time for that. And with that, we do hope for action today.
So before we all pontificate more generally about the plan itself, why don't we try to bifurcate that request into two issues. Let's start with questions or comments that folks have based on the feedback that we had in March, and then we'll move to sort of the general comments at the end about where we want to go from here with the plan. So I'm going to start with you, Mr. Wong, and then we'll move over to you, Ms. Curley.
So prior to this meeting, the SEA held a caucus, and one of the items that was discussed was park and rides. And while we recognize park and rides are mentioned in the plan, we also felt that there needs to be a greater discussion about park and rides in the plan, and frankly, the importance that they are in terms of meeting midterm, mid-range planning needs of the region. I think everybody's experience, the members who are at the caucus, everybody's experience is that the demand for the use of park and rides is growing, obviously because of the region is growing in terms of population. And as a result, the park and rides fill up much earlier. And as a result, there's a spillover onto the streets, and that impacts the cities where the park and rides are situated. Yeah, sorry. And anyway, so that's an area that we would want the plan to address in greater detail. Sorry.
No, you're fine. No big deal, Councilmember Wong.
And that's my comment.
Before we move to you, Councilmember Collard, any initial feedback on that topic? Gil Cerise is sort of lingering behind you, Kelly.
So I'll start and then Gil can add. So we actually have the transit access and parking report that does talk on that, and the TOC has been talking quite a bit about next steps on this topic. So we would be happy to see where we can kind of beef up that information, but if there's something
You covered it. Yeah, there's a transit access and parking strategy. Yeah.
Yeah, so we can certainly take a look at what's in there and where it needs to be highlighted a little bit more, and then perhaps if it does not already address kind of where we are now with that work and next steps, we would certainly be happy to add that.
Councilmember Curler.
I want to expand on that comment. I was in the same caucus meeting, but I made notes to go a little broader. When I looked at your multimodal, I don't know if that is the same or equitable with synchronization, but when we had all these affinitization meetings last year, one that kept coming to the fore was, when I get off my train, I want the bus there, not pulling out away, just as I can wave across the street at this crosswalk at the stoplight. That's one. And so the broader statement is synchronization for transitions, and that goes clear back to the park and rides and everything else. And if there's a better strategy, Sound Transit and others think you should just leave your car at home and I guess bicycle and walk to light rail, but that doesn't seem to be what's happening. So we need to get some reality in the room on what the demand is and what you'd encourage people to do through incentives, and maybe provide circulators so they can get to these things without their cars. But we are stacked cars upon cars at 6 in the morning, people going to light rail that only takes 20 minutes or 30 minutes to get to jobs that they don't have to get to for 2 hours later, because parking is so much in demand right now, and some coming to park there to get in other vehicles to do jobs locally, like painters, and they never use the transit. We've got serious misidentification of what the use of those park and rides are.
So I thank you for the comment. And we have, the transit agencies have been working on, there's an annual integration report, and I'm trying to remember if we actually include that in the plan, and if not, we certainly should. But if nothing else, we can certainly look through that and address and pull out those issues and highlight them a little bit more. And maybe I can call on Trinity to help me out with that one.
And if I remember, Board Member Parker, the last one was focused on park and ride investments and many of the challenges that both of the board members have highlighted so far.
Yeah, and in addition, the Transportation Operators Committee, there's actually a subcommittee of the transit agencies really looking at parking and how do we better manage it, how do we get more capacity out of it. So that work has been going on for the last 6-7 months, and I think we'll produce some good information about how we kind of move forward to better manage our parking. And then in addition, there has been a lot of work done around transit integration and how do we make those transfers between bus and rail and ped bike, all of those access issues and integration things work better. So there's a lot of work that's happening in that area. Signage, how customers find real-time signage, things like that. So that work is underway and ongoing, but very well noted.
Councilman, okay, I'll get to you in just a second, Paul. Councilmember Mel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to try and stay within the bounds you asked us to in the bifurcated conversation. 3 quick points from my perspective, and a huge body of work. Thank you very much, and thank you for summarizing it so well for us. On the equity topic that does keep coming up, we started, I think, a good conversation yesterday, and I know you said that part of the work is to further define equity. I'm grateful for that. I think it's really important that we be clear that we don't try to conflate geographic equity and social equity. Those are two very distinct and different, and both of them are important topics that this region must grapple with. But the strategies and actions around social equity are different than geographic equity. So I think it's really harmful to the conversation and to the goals when we continue to conflate the two out of convenience. So I think we need to be really careful and say social equity and say geographic equity and tackle them separately and differently. So that's one point. I think we need to stop conflating the two. There's a number of next steps that were talked about in the presentation about the 21 or so comments that we're punting for good reason, right? There's a huge body of work that needs to happen, Mr. Chair. And perhaps it's in the matrix, the sympathy document that you're passing around, because there's so many important topics there and bodies of work, to give the board members some certainty that there's a schedule to tackle those issues, in which committees, when, just to give us certainty about that. I would appreciate that, to get real clarity about next steps because of the density of the future bodies of work. And I can't not say something about marine-based transportation and fast ferries. So I thank you for identifying that. I would encourage the PSRC to get really specific about what we mean about PSRC's role. I think PSRC needs to play a very important leadership role in coordinating the many communities that are thinking about fast ferry, from Lake Washington to South Sound and North Sound and everyone in between. There's a lot of interest and there's a lot of double, triple work going on, and I think the PSRC can play a really important coordination role at a minimum in the very, very near term. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Anything to add, Kelly?
I guess, thank you for those. I think those, all of those are very well noted. And I guess in terms of the schedule, our thought was, with the recommendations that we have, which many of these comments refer to, and there's some additional ones, I've already begun the conversations with my board chairs about looking throughout the rest of 2018 and starting to tackle those. So I think we need to still do a little bit more work and maybe map them out in greater detail, but we're raring to go to implement this plan.
So Board Member Ramsey, and then on the phone, Councilmember Robert.
I'd like to briefly comment on number 6.
Dave, sorry, Dave, your microphone's not on.
Briefly comment on number 6, roadway capacity. I think it's great that they call out coordination with WSDOT. I'd also like to encourage other agencies in that coordination relationship, particularly the Transportation Improvement Board, Freight Mobility Board, and the like. And so perhaps language like "and other funding agencies" or something would kind of capture the spirit of that coordination, because I think there are a lot of opportunities around coordinated funding.
Certainly.
On the phone, Councilmember Roberts, thanks for your patience.
Oh, thank you. Just 2 quick comments. I think Trinity Parker covered most of it, but going to parking, I certainly support our continued looking at that, but I think it's important to note that parking issues, particularly at the border of the Sound Transit taxing district, are a very interesting dynamic, because folks are coming from outside of the taxing district and consuming much of the parking capacity. And so I just point that out as to point out the complexities of this, and it looks very different depending on which community you're talking about. So the need to look at multiple tools to address it, and to also look at managing parking. As they say, the high cost of free parking is fairly obvious here. The need to find some pricing mechanisms and some finance mechanisms are important. And I don't think we're here today ready to know what those solutions are. So I think it does make sense to continue to look at it, but I just want to be careful that we're not moving forward in a particular direction without a thoughtful review. So that was what I wanted to make. Thank you.
How about Councilmember Zahn, and we'll keep moving around the corner.
Thank you. I would say that Bellevue has really valued collaboration, because a lot of these issues in transportation are very regional in nature. And a couple things I wanted to mention, and that is that we have been, as the city, working on some multimodal and how we look at evaluating those. So I'm excited to see where that ends up in terms of looking at, well, what is a target mode split and what might make sense there. The other one is on the Vision Zero and the Complete Streets. So we've adopted both of those, and would be interested to see what are some other cities doing and the difference between Target Zero versus Vision Zero. Related to the technology piece, we appreciate the fact that there's been an inclusion of technology as a standalone item in one of the appendices to really highlight the importance of technology in transportation. And I would say that leveraging that as a regional solution. What I heard Kelly talk about was the fact that we really want to make sure we're not duplicating efforts. And so one of the things we wanted to bring up is that Bellevue has identified transportation technology as one of the things we really want to work on, and readying our transportation systems for that. So when you're ready to establish the advisory committee, we would be delighted to take a role in that and be part of the discussion and moving policies forward, and really also the mindfulness of the scope. I would say that our biggest challenge there is how do we look at technology-related funding mechanisms? Where are those? Are there some more partnerships we should be looking at to bring in funding for that? Thank you.
I love the enthusiasm of showing up to your first meeting and volunteering to serve on subcommittees already, Councilmember Zahn. That is very well received by the chair.
Well, I would say that one thing I want to add is that I serve on a couple of committees on the Transportation Research Board, have for the last 5 years, and transportation technology, you cannot actually show up in Washington, D.C. with 10,000 other participants and not be surrounded by transportation technology. So part of what we need to do is figure out how we really leverage that and bring that into our region, because I believe that we have so many of the pieces in place to be the leader for really country related to that. So,
very well said. Mayor Lucas.
Well, thank you very much. Kelly, a couple of points here. Only because I'm still on Beijing time. I stayed up last night and read the whole thing that you submitted. And the personal, individual comments were quite interesting. There was quite a wide range. But a couple of things I'd ask you to comment on. Number one, on page 5 was a comment from an individual about special needs, and I would hope you would read that over again. About what we do with the public to accommodate special needs. So I would highlight that possibly you can come back to the chair and to the executive board on what are we doing with some of those recommendations that were there. I thought that was pretty well written. The second thing, in reading Mr. Millar's letter under groups, he indicated or noted that in the plan it says the average from the household survey for bicycles is 3 miles. For the trip. And I know we put a slug of money into bicycles and so forth in here, and I'd be curious, he had a couple of other comments and thoughts on that. I would look forward at some point in time, expanded on what you have listed for the responses to that, but that's a pretty frightening number as I look at it. The other thing is in your response, the state is doing a testing now on vehicle miles. But in your response, you've already indicated, from a PSRC standpoint, that money, if collected and if approved, could be used for anything, a global kind of a fund. Do you have any thoughts on that, on where did you get that policy thought and decision, and what does that mean it can be used, my words, not yours,
Sure.
that it can be used for anything?
And I will do my best, and perhaps the chair of our finance working group might help me out. I think there's a lot of questions still to be had about these new user fees, and the position of this document and this financial strategy is to not keep them as limited as current funding sources necessarily are, but allow them to be used for other purposes. I apologize, off the top of my head, I don't have a lot of the other policy firm in my head in terms of the details, but it was that ongoing conversation that we've been having about, for example, tolls on certain roadways might have to stay on those certain roadways, and the concept for some of our financial strategy and new revenue sources is to allow them to be used for other opportunities, perhaps within the same corridor, perhaps further afield, but all of those would be to be determined as those fees and opportunities come along line.
Kelly, Pavitra's nodding her head behind you, so you're doing a good job.
Sign.
My memory of that, Mayor Lucas, is also, just to add a little flavor to this, is that we sort of had 2 segments of funding associated with the financial plan, and then also 2 segments of projects associated with that financial plan. And part of the goal there was to be realistic about what we thought was a timeline for regional roadway pricing strategy, but also to make sure that we were consistent with the projects that we were choosing to put into the long-range plan and the funding. This body in the past, as you know, has run into some challenges when we've had more projects than funding. Never have I been a part of this body where we had more funding than projects.
That's fair.
But you know, we I think spent 8 months finance working group developing the financial recommendations, and then has spent another 6 months running those through the model. So I feel pretty confident with the body of work, but we can certainly take another look and respond to your question.
My point is I think I said this several years ago, that if you take 700 million goes to transit and 200 million STP, then nibbling at STP has happened for all sorts of things. I just heard about parking garages. I know Sound Transit can't meet the level if you read some of the comments. And so additional chipping away at STP is the way I see it with federal highway money is going to be park and rides, bikes, TOD, and the list continues. And since congestion is not one of the solvable issues here, or capacity is not changed, then you gave a great report several months ago about the $100+ billion needed to meet our own plans within our communities. Mr. Millar correctly is looking for could be looking for $100 billion more for I-5, things that are all needed. So it's all about the money, and it's just interesting to me on how we're going to prioritize all these things, and that was the precursor to all that. Thank you for the responses. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mayor Erickson, do you want to respond briefly to that, or was this a separate topic?
No, I'd like to respond. We worked a long time in order to put the financial strategy together, and I've taken some heat about the vehicle miles traveled piece of that, and the flexibility entailed with future revenues. I was in a meeting yesterday where I found out that the GPS technology used by Uber is better than our first responders have. In other words, Uber can place you right in front of this desk, whereas fire and police, you've got large spaces that they can't cover. Why did that occur? Because when cell technology first came out, government very restricted what technology and what funding sources could be used with it. So as technology changed, it did not get updated. And so I think about this conversation in that vein, which is we're balancing flexibility looking into the future. How much do we restrict it, and how much do we let it move and change as things change in the future? And it's always a balancing act, right? I mean, we always are dealing with this challenge. It is the funding sources in the future can be used for quote-unquote other things, but they are all transportation related. I want to make that very clear in case this gets on some news media somewhere. We're not going to take the money from this and pay for our firefighters, for instance. I mean, that's not what this is about. But we also have to maintain a level of flexibility, so no matter how good our crystal balls are, we're going to need to have that flexibility in the future. We're all transitioning to electric vehicles right now. What does that really mean? Are we going to need to use funding for electric infrastructure to plug the cars in? We don't know. So I think we need to leave it relatively flexible and hope the people following us will use good judgment about how to use the money.
I'm going to call on Councilmember Richardson at this point. Please.
Excuse me.
If you don't mind you turning your microphone on, Councilmember Richardson, that'd be great.
I don't mind at all. Kelly, in regard to the comment that you made on the slide that in the final plan you were going to address congestion and congestion relief, is that in the final plan that came out at 4 o'clock last week? I'm not on Beijing time, so I have not read it.
Yes, to the extent possible, we did include some additional language in both the executive summary and the plan document to highlight some of the congestion issues and kind of painting that picture. And it was a great comment for us to receive. We realized we kind of just jumped right into here's the plan. So we took a step back and actually tried to paint a little bit of a picture about what is the situation and how is the plan addressing that. So we did do that. We also are we're still working on some visuals that may go into the main document. We'll definitely go into the appendices, which we're still working on.
Okay, because my recollection of our comment to you was the first note of congestion was on like page 82 in a table. And so it's not that any longer?
It is now the first paragraph of the executive summary.
Thank you very much.
How's that for service, Councilmember Richardson? Okay. Secretary Millar, and then we'll sort of open it up to general comments about the plan as opposed to these sort of specific comments that we've been giving so far.
Councilmember Richardson brought up a point that has me wondering what that first paragraph in the executive summary looks like, because the notion, I mean, congestion is a reality, and what we're talking about at our agency is how do you move forward in a congested world, as you are not going to relieve congestion or solve congestion by building your way out of that problem. So we need to be honest about that as leaders in this community, that it's not going to happen. So let's acknowledge congestion exists. We're not unique in that regard, and let's make sure that we're talking about how we move forward with the economy we want, the quality of life we want, the environmental, enhancements we want and protections we want in the face of congestion, as opposed to assuming for 1 minute that we're going to somehow build our way or spend our way out of that situation. I think we also need to acknowledge that congestion is a symptom. It's not the problem. It's not the end. It's a symptom of a problem, and the problem is a lack of housing and transportation choices for the citizens we serve. So I'm hoping that it's a very meaty first paragraph in that executive summary before I'll say it again at the executive board, but I think that's important to distinguish.
And rest assured, we do not claim to solve it, but we do paint the picture of what's happening in the region, and then we move into here's how the plan is addressing these issues moving forward. But that's a good point, and we'll take another look at the phrasing.
Excellent tightrope skills, Ms. McCurdy. Any sort of general comments that folks want to add? This is your chance to pontificate, Secretary Millar, and for those folks on the phone, it's your chance to pontificate too.
I love those opportunities. It was interesting, one of the first comments is people are kind of 50-50 on tolling and road user charges and things like that. I've been going around my stump speech about funding. Let's start with something we can all agree on. We pay a 49.4 a gallon gas tax. It's the second highest in the country. I'm really glad that my colleague, Secretary Richards in Pennsylvania, has to carry the burden of the highest gas tax in the country, but ours is the second highest. What you need to recognize and what your constituents need to recognize is that 70% of that 49.4 cents is going to be dedicated to paying off debt for projects we've already built. And of the money that's left, the majority of that goes to local governments, and the balance of it goes to my agency for maintenance and operations. So cleaning up the litter, the rest areas, the things everybody gripes about, that amount of money has stayed the same for almost 40 years. And the money that has been added to our gas tax is going to pay for improvements, and we as a body and the people that come after us for a generation will be addressing demands from our constituents for more, while the gas tax revenue that's available to us is being used to pay off what has already happened. And so we need to just be honest with ourselves and the people we work with. Everybody wants more, and they want it sooner. And the resource, at least the gas tax resource that's available to us, is spoken for by banks and bondholders. Now, we're not as bad. I have colleagues around the country where all of the money goes to paying off debt, and they don't even have money for the basic life support kind of maintenance activity. So when we talk about tools like tolling and tools like road user charges, when you look at the changes in technology with more electric vehicles, higher fuel efficiency and the like, at some point we're going to have to bite the bullet and make the change from a fuel tax to something else. And when we talk about making substantive change to the system, we're going to have to look at tolling as a means of recovering that cost. So I understand people are split on it. I don't like paying money for things either. But what we need to do is acknowledge that if we're going to provide the changes, the additions, the new ways of business that our constituents want, it's going to be associated with revenue. It's going to have to be, and we're going to have to embrace that and be able and willing to talk about that. You know, the common theme that I get from people is, if you were just smarter with how you spent your money, okay, I've got 8 cents of that 50. The rest of it's going to the banks. I mean, I can be smart or stupid about paying a check to the bank to pay off bonds. We're in the decimal dust in terms of squeezing more out of the revenue that's there. We need to think about doing things differently. I think this plan and the work that the committee did on the financial part of this plan is an important first step, but we all have to recognize that as we implement this plan, we have some tough discussions ahead. Thank you.
Any other comments?
Secretary Millar, thank you for those comments, and I have I guess a question back to you. As we make that transition, because I agree that it's going to have to happen, and I don't know the timeline and how we get the public around it, but 50-50 is better than it used to be, so that's good. How do we set that up? You talked about congestion in an earlier comment about it's a reality of life, which I agree. I agree that we're not going to build our way out of it, but pricing roadways also gives us a tool to help manage congestion, at least to manage it in a way so that our buses aren't stuck in the same traffic and maybe our freight's not stuck in the same traffic too. And so as we move forward, thinking about that future where we are going to have a road usage charge, is there a way to make that both be a revenue source but also a congestion management tool?
That's a great question, and it absolutely can be. You know, when you look at one of our more popular projects, the I-405 Express toll lanes, that project generates a lot of press. I spend a lot of time on it, but when you look at getting more out of what we have, if you look at I-405 in Kirkland, it's 10 lanes of concrete and steel and asphalt and the rest of that. You look at I-5, up in the shoreline area, 10 lanes of concrete, steel, and asphalt. We carry about the same amount of traffic on a daily basis, roughly 100,000 vehicles in each direction. During the peak hour, we're moving 30% more people on I-405 because we're managing the lanes. And that's before you add the transit to the mix. And if you talk to the folks from Community Transit about their investment in the I-5 corridor versus their investment in the I-405 corridor, they're putting more and more and more money into the I-5 corridor to maintain a schedule without any change in service, without any change in ridership. In the I-405 corridor, the ridership is going up at the same investment level because the buses are moving faster and with more schedule certainty. So I think pricing can be a revenue-raising tool. Pricing can also be a management tool. And it gets back to what I said before about congestion being the problem or being the symptom, the problem being a lack of choices. What we have to give people is options. If you recall all the press about the reliable trip time from Everett down to Seattle being 90 minutes, and everybody was freaking out about that. It was 90 minutes if you drive alone. It's half that if you take the bus. And that wasn't in the press at all. It's half that if you carpool, and it's getting better because of the investments in bus rapid transits, the investments in bus on shoulder, the investments in light rail, and the like. We need to be talking about that. At what point does 40 minutes each direction every day of a 50-week work year, when does that start to matter enough to a motorist that they'll get out of their car and get on the bus, that they'll get out of the car and carpool? We have to get that information out. We have to provide those choices, and I think congestion pricing is a way to do that. I think the road user charges are a way to do that. In addition to raising the revenue, is giving people viable choices about how they get around this community.
So we got a couple other tents going up, and I just want to highlight I'd love to, if there are any of our alternates who are sitting in the front row, if any of you want to add anything, you're more than welcome to, as well as folks on the phone. Let's go with Board Member Curler. I saw your 10 first.
I just want to throw in, I totally support everything I just heard over here from Millar. I am amazed how much we talk about congestion and move me out of my car, into my bus, onto my bike. I'm that person. I'm doing those things. But at the same time, we are putting no pressure from public-private partnerships on corporations, unlike we did with Boeing, where we made them do different shifts at different times on the roads to relieve congestion, and with Microsoft, who amazingly has come up with circulars and relocated offices so that they could take some of the pound of flesh out of the congestion. I work for the city of Seattle. I'm going to stare at a council member and say, why aren't you pressuring managers who think we have to be on the floor to do IT work when I could do it just as well from home and never get in my car and never risk my neck on my bicycle going on trails that are not sufficient enough to protect me from automobiles? Why aren't we pressuring private and starting with public employers to help us work from home? It's ridiculous the amount of jobs we can do at home and not ever be on the street. And I would wonder if we should put that into our plan, since we did it to Boeing when it had 165,000 workers here and they were wiping out our commutes way back in the 70s. And we did it again to Microsoft and I assume Google and others to come up with solutions to be closer located to where they work. How about a big idea that says no one can afford to live in Seattle? They're all moving to Tacoma and elsewhere, and down in the South King County area, and many of those do not have to come into the centers, city centers at all, if their employers would give them incentives, and if the government would give them incentives to keep their people at home working on laptops. And the last comment I have is everything we talked about does not address what my colleague over here said in terms of social equity. If you raise the tolls, you wipe out probably 75% of my city's ability to take an uncongested roadway. Just saying. And the bus rates are not low enough for them either.
Thank you, Councilmember Kohler. And I'd like the record to reflect that she was making excellent eye contact with both her city council members, Councilmember O'Brien and myself. Yes.
Whom I love dearly.
I saw that, Councilmember O'Brien, trying to say, this isn't really mine, but you do chair the Transportation Committee. Mayor Ralph, please.
Thank you. I just want to, everything that Secretary Millar said, in my mind, circles back to access to transit, and that is something that has been brought up by the SEA caucus already, but just want to kind of drive that point home. For so many of our residents, if they can't get to transit, they can't use it. So the choice becomes, do I sit in my car for an hour, or do I circle around a parking lot to leave my car someplace for an hour and then end up being late? And that's a story that we hear over and over again. So at some point, they're just giving up and saying, I'm just going to sit in my car and budget that hour. So it really does come down to figuring out how in the cities that are surrounding Seattle, Tacoma, Everett, that we have a way for our residents, whether that be park and rides on the outsides of the town so that we have, and then it's a bus trip to the Sounder or light rail, something, but it really has to be, for us, it's a key part of the planning, and that access has to continue to be at the forefront of the conversation.
Councilmember Zahn.
Yeah, actually, I was thinking the same thing, because last week I was trying to go to the Go Green conference at the convention center from the east side. Wanted to get there by 1 o'clock, drove to Mercer Island, couldn't find a parking spot, so I ended up driving into town and paying $15 to park for several hours. And what it makes me think about is that I could afford to do that because, one, I had a car, and two, I was going to pay the money. But from an equity standpoint, it is a concern to me about how that works. And it makes me think about then what is the situation with parking, and how do we look at whether there's a way to put in some short-term or a parking structure that perhaps in the interim serves as a parking lot, but that over time could be repurposed to something else if we actually are able to solve our first and last mile challenges. So folks are able to go right from their home to a transit hub and into their destination. So those are some things that I think about? And then what are some partnerships that are possible with other private entities that might allow us to do Uber and Lyft to a park and ride to get on transit? And I think that King County's been doing some of that work already. In terms of looking at that, I think we need to look at that more broadly and see what else we can do.
Excellent comments. I don't see any of our alternates jumping up to offer comments, so I'll just say thank you. Hi, nice to see you all. Anybody on the phone want to jump in? Hearing none, I'll call on you, Councilmember Richardson.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, please. Was that Councilmember Roberts?
Roberts here. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to comment and appreciate the discussion, but we really do live in a region that does not uniformly fit one kind of job and one kind of job function. And as the person who is responsible for doing the environmental review for Boeing's expansion and the center, which is the largest manufacturing center in the region, and as one who represents a part of the region where my people have to get on the road every day, and they don't know how long it'll take them, many of my people, but they know that they're expected to be at work on time, whether it's Google or Amazon or some other place or Boeing. They're not all able to work on a screen. So while I think that's a great place to go in trying to bring the job housing balance together, and that should be, and I think is reflected in the plan, I think we also have to recognize that our region is significantly geographically constrained. And so we have to come up with models that work for all kinds of job types and make that work for the region. And frankly, that's where the importance of investing in public transit as well as TOD does help us come closer to that job-work balance. But we're not there today, and we're not going to be within the time frame of this plan. So I think we just need to protect that diversity while moving in the direction of better housing and job balance.
Excellent comments, as always, Councilmember Robertson. And I should mention that I think we should all be looking to other jurisdictions and regions throughout the country because they are really jealous of the fact that we are spending so much time and energy talking about these things. So far today, we've had an individual self-identify as a member of the Transportation Research Board. We had an individual reference Donald Shoup and the work of the high cost of free parking, and now we're talking about what used to be called spatial mismatch and is now called jobs housing balance. I mean, this is a very well-informed body that is making some really data-driven decisions, and I'm really proud of that. Councilmember Richardson.
Thank you very much, and I'll be short. And Secretary Millar and I are going to keep writing this first paragraph together because it was mentioned over here and I appreciate your point about not being able to build our way out of it, but the reality is economic decisions that are happening, most of which are market driven, has resulted in an extremely high cost of housing in King County. And what we find in Pierce County, of course, is many of those employees are moving to Pierce County and have to try to find a way to get to Seattle to go to work. And so, just the concept, for example, of the spine, that we're going to continue to build with light rail. I don't think anybody's going to get on a light rail car and take 2 hours by light rail to get to Seattle. I mean, I just don't see that happening. They're going to get in a car. And so maybe what we need to do is focus on where we need to really focus on congestion and improvement rather than just carte blanche. We can't build our way out of it. There's no fix. Because the realities that were talked about over here is if we make it very, very difficult for people to get to transit, to get to Seattle, they're not going to do it. Given a choice, they're going to get in the car, and they may have to leave a little earlier from home, but they're going to get in the car.
Councilmember Ryan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That was very interesting, Mr. Millar, about the percent that goes to debt, and that's actually good information for everybody to know. I think that when you say we can't build our way out of it, I think we all recognize that we can't just all of a sudden triple the size of I-5 or anything, but we can't say we're throwing up a white flag and we're not going to build anything. So I think really what you're saying is we have to find the balance, right? Because, for example, we're counting on ST3 coming up to Everett eventually, hopefully within our lifetimes. And when it's there, we have to be able to transport people to get to it. And we talked about this before. One of those up in Snohomish County, a major east-west corridor is State Route 524, also known as Maltby Road. And it should go all the way from Highway 9 all the way down into Edmonds. And it was a county road at one point, and the state said, no, we're going to make it a state route, and that was good and fine. Unfortunately, it never got widened. So if we want people to get into the spine, to take the train down to Seattle or wherever, the bus has to be able to get there. So we need to work on our county roads for sure, but we also need to make sure that the state works on the state routes so that we can get people in a timely manner on a bus to the spine and taking ST3 into Seattle. I'm just saying there's a balance there, I'm sure, and I'm sure that's what you meant.
Save us, Secretary Millar. You're our only hope.
Good luck with that. You know, as far as the balance is concerned, yeah, I agree there needs to be balance. A lot of the transportation problems we have today are because of the bad land use decisions we made in the past. And so one of the ways we can spend a whole bunch of money on highways, or we can spend a whole bunch of time on fixing some of our land use problems that might be less expensive in the long run. So, you know, I think that's a part of it. I think another thing we need to look at is, you know, we looked at what would it take to solve congestion. I got a note from a Snohomish County resident when I was first appointed. Congratulations on your appointment. The speed limit signs say 60 miles an hour on I-5. I can't drive 60 miles an hour. Your agency's failing. So I asked, what would it take to drive 60 miles an hour?
That wasn't me.
It wasn't you. No, it wasn't. I think it was Councilmember Roberts. But, you know, what would it take to enable everybody to drive 60 miles an hour on our interstates all the time? It's, you know, it's $115 billion. If we did it over 20 years, it's a $2.50 a gallon gas tax, and that addresses the people that live here today. That doesn't address growth. And if we built all that interstate, do you have the city streets and the county roads to accommodate it? Do we have the water? Do we have the air? Do we have the patience? We can't, you know, grossly build our way out. Do we need some system expansion? Yes, absolutely. But the other things we need to think about are state of good repair. The fact that our roads are not in a state of good repair, we all pay an equivalent $1.25 a gallon gas tax because of the cost in terms of rock chips on our windshields and front end alignments and blown out tires and things like that. Safety, you know, when the train crash happened, we lost 3 people. It was international news. That same week, 10 people died on our highways. 540 people died on our highways last year, and 2,200 were seriously injured. That's a $9 billion a year hit to our economy. We spend all of our time talking about congestion. If we're going to be balanced, what do we spend on addressing that safety problem, and what kind of return can we get on that investment? So if we're looking at state of good repair, if we're looking at safety, if we're looking at how do we get more out of what we've got on the road today and on the rails today and in the bus fleets today, and then system expansion is a part of that mix, a part of that conversation, that's great. What I've seen in the past over my 40-year career is it's all about system expansion, and that other stuff is, you know, you don't cut ribbons on it. You don't break ground on it. It's not too sexy, but that's the stuff that makes the economy go. What we're trying to do as an agency is move from an agency that is actually pretty darn good at designing and delivering projects. You know, we have our top of the fold front page failures from time to time, but by and large, you know, you look at the Nicola TPA and the rest of that, 90+% on time, on budget. We're good at that. We want to be stewards of a system, and we need to spend more time thinking about how we operate the system and how we maintain it going forward. And that's the balance that we're looking for. And I think this plan actually addresses a lot of that, getting back to the plan. I think this plan addresses a lot of that. And I'm looking forward to working with all of you guys to implement it. And Mr. Chair, is there actually a motion on the table to do something?
We're getting close to that. I think you're the last one.
Is somebody pre-programmed to make that motion? I would move that we recommend the adoption of the plan.
Seconded.
So it's been properly moved and seconded. And you got who those two were, right? Yeah, okay. Everybody's good. Any further discussion about the action in front of us? Okay. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
We've got one nay. Congratulations, folks. The plan is adopted. I want to take a moment as the chair's privilege to just say a couple of quick thank yous. I've been on this illustrious body for almost 15 years now, which means that not only did I start when I was in high school, basically, but it's my fourth plan adoption. And the previous three had a lot similarly robust discussions in the last meeting, but maybe much more contentious discussions. In 06, we spent a lot of time at the last meeting really fighting about the centers concept. In 2010, we spent a lot of time fighting about what was in the financially constrained versus the financially unconstrained plan. In 2014, we were fighting about how we were going to pay for the things in the plan, and then also a lot about environmental issues. And here we are having a really nice, robust discussion really about park and ride access, which is an important issue, I think, for all of us, but not nearly to the level of real macro level issues that we were still debating up until the last moments of those previous plan adoptions. And I think that really stands on the shoulders of the really good work that staff have done over the last year and a half on this. And so I want to say a big thank you to Mayor Erickson and the work of the Finance Working Group, who spent a ton of time and energy building a really wonderful political consensus about how we're going to pay for all of this stuff. I want to say thanks to a couple of our alumni, Charlie and Robin, who helped us really, I think, get us to a position where in those small working groups last year we were lifting up what could have been the more controversial decisions and really wrestling with those early on and talking about them and coming to some natural conclusions. I want to, of course, thank the work of Pavitra and Ben and the other Ben, thank you, to really help with a lot of that technical work. And I'm certain there are other folks on the staff that I've forgotten too. But then to Josh and Kelly, who've really shepherded us through the finish line here. We're really grateful to you all for the mountains of work. And a good plan is never done. We've had feedback today that suggests we need to start really working on implementation. And believe it or not, we'll start kicking off the next update in just another 18 months or so. But I'm grateful to you all for all the work that you've done to get us here. And thank you to you all for all of your great work. I've learned a lot, and I'm really grateful for the participation of so many wonderful folks around the table. So thank you. Why don't we move on to Gil and agenda item number seven, coordinated special grant programs.
Yeah, thank you. So this is a presentation on a proposal to streamline our existing PSRC Special Needs Transportation Grant Program. And so we'll start off with a little bit of a background about what that is. We'll talk about the process as it currently exists for the last 10 years that we've had, and then go over the proposal with you. And so just as a matter of definition, special needs transportation is transportation for those unable to transport themselves or purchase transportation due to age, income, or disability. That is seniors, youth, people with low income, people with disabilities. Those are the main groups. And we just talked about our regional transportation plan. We have a planning document as part of that. The coordinated plan is an appendix to that document, and that provides our basis for the funding program that we've been doing, the coordinated grant program. And so they talk about the needs and gaps of special needs transportation and the prioritized strategies that we use. And so the coordinated grant program that we have been managing at PSRC funds programs really oriented to private nonprofits and human service transportation providers. It's oriented to the large urban area in our region, the western portions of King, Pierce, and Snohomish counties. And it's a pretty small amount relative to the amounts that PSRC sees, approximately $2 million a year for that large urban funding. And so therefore, we typically leverage that funding source with the statewide consolidated grant program, which a number of complementary programs like rural formula programs, state programs for demand response and things like that, about $26 million per year. So we time our process and coordinate with them on that process. Excuse me. So here we did a couple of diagrams of how the process looks from the perspective of an applicant. And so this is what we have been doing for approximately the last 10 years of our coordinated grant process that we bring before you every 2 years. And an applicant typically has to apply to, or they typically apply to both processes. They don't have to. I looked back at it, and in the last competition, we had about 80% of the applicants who applied to both PSRC and the state. And they do that for a variety of reasons, but one of which is that some of them would require state funding for their local match for federal funds. But typically they find it advantageous to take advantage of that coordinated timing and apply to both funding sources. You see here also in the form of our coordinated process that there's duplication in a lot of the different types of funding boxes that we have here. There's both WSDOT and PSRC have as requirements of our project selection authority. We have to both do evaluation and scoring, for example. We have applications to fill out, things like that. So there's a little bit of duplication in terms of administering this program between the two organizations. And then another point is that any applicant seeking state funds, the state asks that for them to do regional priority rankings from the regions. So we do have a role in providing that regional priority. That kind of results in a shifting or a time frame difference between PSRC being able to award our funds a little bit earlier than the state, and so we're trying to reflect that in our existing process as well. So this is, we receive a lot of feedback from our applicants and stakeholders on the process as it exists. So we've been working with the State Public Transportation Office to come up with a proposal here before you today, a streamlined proposal for how we're going to, we propose to move forward with the grant process for these private nonprofits and human service transportation providers in the future. And so as you can see under this proposal, we no longer have a $2 million and a $26 million separate but coordinated timeframes or processes. We have one process, one time frame, and basically the applicant would just have to turn in an application to the state at a state call for projects. Their application would be then reviewed by the state for their scoring process. They'd be reviewed by the PSRC. We would still have a role in terms of developing a regional priority ranking as we have every 2 years in the past. And that would go to our major stakeholders. The Special Needs Transportation Committee and the Transportation and Operators Committees would be able to look at those regional rankings and provide a recommendation to you. And you would still see those, and that would then go into the state evaluation and scoring process and award process. And PSRC would still be involved in that, in our coordination with the state. They said that we could work with them through those processes, so that would be part of the proposal. And then ending up in a unified special needs project implementation at the end of the. And some of the advantages of this process, again, we have most applicants seek and receive funding from both sources anyway. So this combines that into a larger pool. It provides a little bit of a more flexibility in terms of applicants accessing the full suite of funding sources, the full 28 million rather than looking at 2 million and 26 million. And then the large urban funds will remain in this region. There's no way that they would be allowed to take some of that $2 million per year and give it to a project in Spokane, for example. And then finally, both our committees reviewed this proposal back in January. We went over it in some detail with them, and then they asked for a recommendation in February. Both committees provided a unanimous recommendation for this body. So, and with that, there's the action before you today. I'll take any questions that you might have.
Questions? Councilmember Mello.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have a question. At this body, I represent Pierce Transit, and I just wanted to thank you for identifying an opportunity to streamline the process, use local transit agency staff time a little bit more efficiently, and be more thoughtful about that. So very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody want to make a comment against streamlining and efficiency? I'm not seeing any. Board Member Ashby, please.
I just do have a question. Is that 26 million, or now the total of 28, is that all of the money for the statewide consolidated grant?
Yes, that is my understanding. It's about 26 per year for all the different funding sources, and they do it on a biennial basis. So that's
And is this region, the 3 counties, allocated a certain number of spots within that?
So the way the state does it, they have regional rankings that they allocate by the regions, and so we have a certain number of high, medium, and low priorities expressed in A's, B's, and C's, and that's how those priorities in the regions are expressed.
Okay, and my question is simply because I sit on the Peninsula RPTO, and Kitsap, that is where we access the consolidated grant.
Right.
We don't do it in this group. And the Peninsula's RPTO is allowed 7 A's, 7 B's, and then as many C's as, and I'm wondering, you're adding $2 million to our pot, but, so we're going from the 26 to the 28 million total, but you're not influencing the number of slots each RPTO or MPO can access or submit.
At the end of every biennium, the state goes through a grants process evaluation, GPAC process, and so they look at that and update it. And I believe they're doing that again this year. And there's a proposal to do that. I believe it adds rankings to the different regions based upon updates to the demographics. So it is changing, but it changes, I think, between every biennium. So.
I think put more directly, I guess, Councilmember Ashby, I don't think there's strings attached with our dollars. But that's what I'm hearing from you, Gil, that we are not saying our $2 million gives us 2 more slots. No. Instead, our $2 million has got to be spent within the 3 county of the 4 county region, but it doesn't change any of the prioritization.
It doesn't change any of the rest of the competition.
It doesn't sound like it, right, Gil?
No, it does not.
Great. Sorry to restate that question, Councilmember Ashby, but I just wanted to make sure that we got that one right for you. Board Member Parker, please.
Thank you, Chair Johnson. As Gil said, this went through both Special Needs Transportation Committee and the TOC. We heard about it in January. We had a good discussion about it. It was approved unanimously by both committees. And just wanted to point out that it does really streamline the process for review and approval of the grants, but it also really streamlined the application process for the providers, and that was something that was discussed quite a lot and is of huge value since a lot of these are nonprofit organizations. So I just wanted to make that point. Thank you.
Board Member Ramsey.
I think this coordinated grant program is wonderful, and I compliment you for doing that. And my question is, are there other agencies that we could work with in a similar coordinated approach? And you know where I'm going. The Transportation Improvement Board funds many of the same types of projects, same cities, same applicants. As a former user of an applier for both agencies for grants, some type of coordinated grant program involving TIB and others would be wonderful. And I would just really encourage all of us to pursue that.
I will definitely make that call and have that conversation for the next process.
Thank you.
Further questions? This one does require a motion, folks, so I'd look around the table to see if anybody's willing to offer.
So moved.
Moved and seconded, Councilmember Crowler and then Councilmember Mello. Any further discussions? Okay, seeing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. 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 Any opposed? Congratulations, Gil. Thanks for the good work. You've already even left the table. Nice job. Yes, he's already streamlined himself out. Sorry to steal that joke, Secretary Millar. So let's move on to our final agenda item. Welcome, Sean.
Thank you. This is a presentation on our performance measurement requirements. For some of you, this will be, you've heard about this before. For some of you, this might be new, so we wanted to provide some background on where we are with this, as well as to provide an update on what the Regional Council has accomplished so far, and then what remains to be finalized in 2018 here. And then lastly, we want to contrast this with some of what PSRC does to go beyond these requirements and some of what we've actually looked at just as part of the regional transportation plan process that we've just gone through. So just a background, MAP 21 introduced an emphasis on performance and outcome-based planning in 2012, which was carried forward in 2015 under the FAST Act. So this began a new performance-based planning framework that emphasized prescribed measures and methodologies for their measurement. USDOT established performance measurement in an effort to track progress towards meeting new national goals. These were broadly safety, asset condition, congestion, reliability, freight, and other environmental goals. Since that time, state DOTs and MPOs have been tasked with reviewing available data and establishing targets through a collaborative process. Various teams have been working on the details around these since very early on in 2016. A couple worth mentioning, the Target Setting Framework Group. This involved MPO planning directors throughout the state and WSDOT staff to ensure that an approach was taken that would work for all MPOs throughout the state, not just with PSRC. Also, numerous technical teams for each of the different measures, so different experts in all of these different areas got together in working groups, and they've been working on the measures and targets since that time. So it's worth emphasizing a significant amount of work has taken place since then, with much of this finally being implemented this year. So it's taken all of that time to really get to where we are now. And another point worth emphasizing, these measures are specific and prescriptive. So a lot of times the methodology was really, it was in the regulation, so there wasn't a lot of interpretation or room for developing a different method for measuring the outcomes. So just this slide shows you the progress to date. So many of you recall that last year you provided a recommendation to the Executive Board to approve for our transit asset management targets. This was the measurement by transit agencies for rolling stock, facilities, infrastructure, and equipment condition. Then earlier this year in January, the recommendation was for our safety performance measures. And so we've gone through both of those. As you can see here, though, there's a lot of work that remains to be done this year. So we have bridge and pavement condition, system performance, freight movement, and then some emission reduction measures for congestion mitigation and air quality improvement program. So I'll go over some of these a little bit more coming up next.
Sean, can I have you pause there for a second?
Yeah.
If I remember correctly, the rationale about why we've taken on progress to date in these performance target areas is because we've had the federal performance targets given to us in that order, correct?
Yes, so these were the first ones where the rulemaking was completed, and so these targets and measures were finalized earlier. Some of them were only finalized last year.
So it's not that this board is behind in approving what is required by the feds, but rather that we're doing them in the order that they're given to us by the feds in their rulemaking process.
That'd be correct, yeah. So here are the remaining upcoming targets that we're going to talk about this year. It's worth remembering this is primarily a statewide approach, so in many cases these are really just the region's share of the statewide measure. So the first one we're looking at here is bridge condition. This measures the percentage of state bridges classified as good or poor. This will be measured using the existing National Bridge Inspection Standards with ratings of good, fair, and poor measured based on a percentage of the deck area. After that, we have our pavement condition measure. Again, this will be measured reporting on segments of the NHS and the interstate that are rated as good, fair, or poor for both asphalt and concrete. For asphalt, the measure is cracking, roughness, and rutting. For concrete, the measure is for crackness, roughness, and faulting. So a couple different ways of looking at it there. And again, lots of work has been done to look at how this is going to be measured, what it's going to look like for the state, and what those specific targets will be. The next one, freight movement, is very similar to the system performance measures. This is a very prescriptive measure that's looking at truck travel time reliability on the interstate system only. This methodology has been provided in the regulations. Reliability is defined here as observed truck travel time measured against normal travel time, so posted speed limit, if you will. For the system performance, we have travel time reliability. This is another one where the measure was prescribed in the regulations. This looks at the ratio of longer travel times measured against normal travel times, or posted speed limit, if you will, for the national highway system. It then applies an occupancy factor to convey this in terms of percent of person miles traveled that are reliable. So this is also a good point to pause and remind you that we will shortly be talking about many of the other measures that PSRC evaluates, similar to what we looked at in the regional transportation plan process. The last ones here, traffic congestion, peak hour excessive delay. So this measure considers excessive delay on the national highway system to be segments with travel times at 60% of the posted speed limit. And then again, this is weighted by volumes and occupancy. We also have a non-SOV vehicle, non-SOV travel measure. And this is looking at the percent of carpool, vanpool, public transportation, walking, biking, and telecommuting. And then lastly, there is a CMAQ program measure, which is looking at emissions reduced from projects funded with CMAQ dollars. So this is the overview of what remains to be looked at this year. And we'll be bringing these in front of you throughout the year for more information and more detail on what the performance is and the specific targets are once they've been finalized with all of the different working groups.
John, what you've said outlined so far are all the base minimum standards that the feds require, correct?
Yes, and there's the approach that's been taken is the target setting it's against a statewide effort, so it's not just limited to our region, and for many of them it's we're looking at targets that are the expected result, so that we could see what that looks like moving forward.
But as a reminder for board members on an issue like transit asset, for example, we went further than what the federal standard requires in some instances, and also provided some flexibility within the region based on individual transit agency operating life cycle, for example. So I mean, I think that this is important for us to have everybody understand what the baseline is, but that in some instances we certainly go further than what is the minimum requirement.
And I think that's a great segue to the next slides. I gave Sean all the boring stuff, and I kept all the fun stuff for myself. One of the reasons we wanted to get in front of you is we know that by October, I believe, we have to have those remaining targets adopted. So we'll come back at various points. But we really wanted to emphasize the wonkiness of the federal rules. There's very little flexibility in some of them in terms of how they're calculated. And in some cases, particularly for some of the system performance measures, that's just not how we tend to talk about the issues, and we wanted to just remind folks that we have to do the federal rules. In some cases, we have to do it in a very specific way. So we wanted to lay that out, but then remind folks that we feel that this body has directed us to work on measures that tell the story better of a lot of those same things, and we pulled this from the plan that you just recommended for adoption. And I'll just give some of these highlights. We look at in more detail in terms of transit boardings. We look at that accessibility to transit. We look at bike and walk trips, and a lot of this we can get from the household travel survey that we do. And again, comparing that to some of the methodology that's required under these federal rules, it's just quite different. We look at travel time. We look at travel delay. We also look at travel time and travel delay for trucks in a different manner than the feds have prescribed for us. In terms of emissions, the CMAQ emissions one was actually quite straightforward for us because, as you know, you award CMAQ dollars to projects, and we are already required to report estimated emissions reductions. So this is just another way of doing the exact same thing that we're already doing. But we go further than that. We report on all of the regional emissions beyond just what's funded through the CMAQ program. So we wanted to lay that out for you again, just to kind of remind you that the federal performance targets, we're stuck with them. We have to do them. We've been working quite a bit with the state. We're trying to align with the state, but we wanted to let you know that that's kind of a set that we have to do, but there's a lot more that we are doing and a lot more that we can do. We'll continue to work with you on those additional measures. I know when we had the earlier conversations, there a robust discussion about other things that you would like to see that we will continue to work on. So we have to have the target recommendations in October. So I will work with the chairs on figuring out when is best to come back in front of you. We will because there's quite a few of them, we'll definitely get back in front of you and give you a briefing to chew on them before we come back for action. So but sometime between the summer and fall, you'll continue to see those. And then on those other modeling efforts and measures, we'll continue to work on improving how we tell the story and the measures that we evaluate, and we'll continue to report back to you, both in terms of the federal targets. Once we have data to report back, we'll certainly do that, but then all the other performance measures that we've built into the system.
Just a reminder, performance measures don't have to be boring. That safety discussion we had in January, which was focused really about performance measures, was amongst the most robust of discussions we've had as a board in a while. So we're going to endeavor to continue, Mayor Erickson and I, to keep this a place where you're ideally spending less time on your phones and more time interacting with each other and the presentation. So I don't begrudge any of you from having that moment of endorphins where you feel like you need to check in with the outside world out of this room. But in a perfect world, we're keeping you present here for most of the time. Yes, please, Councilmember Zahn.
Thank you. So I was not here in November when the safety one was talked about. That's why I was actually going and looking at that information. I was curious, since Secretary Millar mentioned the number of fatalities in 2017, what was the number there that you mentioned?
2017, I believe it was 537 fatalities and 2,209 serious injuries.
Yeah, because if I go back and look at the presentation from November and look at the target that was set, it's showing a safety target of 415 WSDOT target in 2018, and hopefully in 2017 that the line is dropping, but it's actually gone up.
That's work that the Washington State Traffic Safety Commission does. WSDOT is a member of that commission, along with cities, counties, the Health Department, DSHS, State Patrol, and others. I sit on that board, but that commission develops the Target Zero plan and the safety plan for the state. And yeah, it's going the wrong direction.
So is there a report, once we have these targets established, is there some kind of an annual report out to see how we're doing here?
We will. That's certainly the plan. And this is the first time we're setting these targets that are federally required. And as we have that data, we are happy to come back with regular reports. Definitely annually, but if the data becomes available sooner, we'll do that as well.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments on this topic? Anything else that you wanted to add, Sean?
No, that covers it.
Okay, Mayor Lucas?
If I could take you back to the performance measures on the people who walk or bike. I love math and I love finance. So in 2040, you indicate about 1.6 million walk or bike. So if I divide that by 365, it comes out to be about 4,000 a day. Figuring they're going and coming, it's down to 2,200 a day. And if you look at it over 22 years, that's 100 people a year. Check that math out. I think I'm right. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other comments or thoughts? Okay, thanks you guys. Looking forward to adopting this body of work later on this year. That concludes the agenda for today. Does anybody have any good of the order comments that they'd like to make? We're back then again on May the 10th, and don't forget to save the date for the General Assembly for May the 31st. See you all then. We're adjourned.